Okay. So the game started with knight f3, and before going into this, I already beat Walter 2 times, and I had black both those times, and we played an e4 game. We played a Sicilian in our first matchup, and then we played a Pierce in our second matchup. The Sicilian game ended in like 12 moves, and he pushed his king over and ran away because he was so upset. And then in the Pierce opening, he had a fantastic advantage. I defended nicely. Then I found a move that equalized by bringing my queen like all the way into his grill, and then he blundered in the tactics. So going into this, in both of those past games, in the tactics, I have always been better. And when you play e4, you're inviting lots of tactics. For example, the pawn is already hanging, right? So any moves involving attacking this pawn or threatening to capture, maybe you can use that pawn, you can sacrifice it for an attack, and that just creates more complications, right? That makes sense. When you play like d4, it's already defended, so there's less possibility for those kinds of situations, right? The game is more positional when you play d4. When you play knight f3, you are able to go into both these openings or even c4, right? You can still go into a very tactical battle, or you can go into a positional approach. This is called the ready opening. I feel like it's my favorite opening. It's actually started with my knight because it's not committing anything from you. So you're waiting to see what your opponent does in response. You can still hear me, right?
Okay. Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So
And
what why does that allow you to play any of those pawns? Simply because you already have control of the center, or
because you haven't committed them, meaning like what's the standard way to get to a Sicilian is e4 c5, right?
yeah.
Um, so it's e4 c5 where you're playing knight f3 on move 2, right? And this is the open Sicilian. If you play knight f3, your opponent plays c5, you could either go into like a d4 line, which is fine, and it's going to be less tactical, or you can just go straight into a Sicilian and transpose. So
Okay.
you're giving yourself options, lots of options. I like to give myself options, so um, yeah. And but so knight f3 being a very positional move, but also you're just waiting. 90% of the time, you move this knight out anyways, so you can castle. And so it kind of like struck me a little different. I was like, okay, knight f3, like that's not what we usually do. What's he got in store? Should I play c5 here, try and get into a Sicilian? That'd probably be okay. But I wanted to return the favor and not commit, so I play knight f6. D5 is also a perfectly fine move, but again, you're committing, right? So I didn't want to commit. Um, and then he plays d4, and so now he's committing. Now he's showing his intention. He's like, okay, I'm going to I'm going to clamp down on e5, and I'm going to play a positional game. Maybe we'll play like a queen's gambit. Who knows? So I can play d5 here and be symmetrical, but if you're trying to go for a win, you don't play symmetrical. And I also don't know these lines. It's like a symmetrical queen's pawn game. What I do know is to play c5 here, where I know if he pushes, I can play an opening I know very well, the pseudo Banco. If he plays c4, then I'll just trade. C always takes on d4, and then I'll just have more pawns in the center. I'm perfectly fine playing this opening as well. And honestly, this creates more tactics. And in the past 2 games, I've been better at him in those tactics. So he ends up taking on c5, which is also fine. It looks like it's a gambit, like it's a free pawn, and it is, except I'm able to regain it quite quickly by playing e6. And now the bishop is going to develop, but with extra tempo, because he's had to move his pawn twice, and my bishop gets to c5 in one go, and I'm also recapturing, so it's perfectly fine. You may be asking, okay, what if he hangs on to the pawn by playing like b4? And what essentially happens is the game turns into a queen's gambit accepted, but with colors reverse. Um, what that means is if you start with d4, well, the way I usually get it is actually knight f3 d5, c4. This is a ready gambit, colors reversed. And it looks very similar to the game that was played, except white has a knight on f6. And I love, this is my favorite opening. Like if I can get this position, I feel like I'm winning every time, because if they play that move b5 to defend, I've pretty much, I feel like there's just a move, there's just forcing moves that guarantee white an edge in this situation. So returning to our game when he plays c5 and this, I feel like I'm just heading into my favorite opening. So the opening worked out great
Okay.
for me. I thought about playing e5, which is kind of like uh, it's a blunder because you give up the e5 pawn, but it gives you again better development and interesting tactics. And that is how I've won my games against Walter, is bringing these sharp positions, so the game becomes sharper here. But e5 just gives up a free pawn, and he can totally just diffuse my tactics by playing something like e3, and I'm just up. He's just up a pawn, so I didn't do that. I just played the regular e6. He plays g3, and this shows his intentions that he's playing a fianchetto setup, very much like a Catalan opening or an English. So I'm expecting this move dc5, and he's going to try and fight for these light squares, right, with his bishop.
Feels passive.
It is a little passive. He played passive the whole game, um, but yeah, it's a great opening. Like it's cunning, it's deceptive. Like there's many tactics involved that you may not be thinking about with that bishop on g2. But I know that okay, with that bishop on g2, I have to make sure that I control these squares really well. Don't hang my rook. You know, be careful about how I develop my pieces. Um, so I didn't have to think about that right now. Right now, I just take the pawn with my bishop and prepare to castle. I thought of for a minute here. Okay, what if I do like bishop takes f2 and queen b6, and there are some lines that could favor you. So like if he takes here, queen b6, bishop e3, and knight g4 check, and I'm winning my piece back. But he has a better move, which is e3. Again, just thinking about putting pressure on my opponent, creating sharp positions, because that's how I've beaten him in the past. Instead, I went just for the regular castling. I was like, okay, we'll just play a regular game here. I'll play positionally good chess, and then if you play good position, tactics will flow, and then you'll be better. Okay, and I thought for a minute here, like playing d5, and that's probably like the best move. Take the center, open up your squares for your bishop. But the problem I have with d5 is bishop g5 and a c4, and it's d5 is going to start collapsing, right? D5 invites all the trades on the light squares, which will help out his bishop in the future. So I didn't like bishop g5. So before d5, I played h6, just avoiding bishop g5. Okay, and then I'll play d5 next turn. He plays c4, the best move. Now d5 looks like it's a little bit harder to play, but it still works. But I probably can't delay it any further. Like if I play knight c6, he plays knight c3, and now d5 is really hard to play, and it would probably just give me a weak pawn in the center that he can play against. With he could play lots of moves here, but already here this pawn is becoming a little weak. So I couldn't delay any further with knight c6. I had to play d5 now. Um, and now if he plays knight c3, then I just push d4, and a very similar situation happens in the game where black is going to get more of the center, and he's going to have that positional edge, and the tactics are going to favor him. Okay. He does not trade. He plays queen c2, which is inaccurate. And when you're at this level of chess, the smallest inaccuracies are how you're going to be capitalizing, right? So queen c2 not being the best, probably should have taken, where knight takes d5 would be the move. Again, not wanting to play e takes because it creates an isolated pawn, which is a weakness. Something we haven't gone over in our lessons. But if you look at this structure, like it's great. I don't want to be ruining that. I don't want to be giving myself more pawn islands, right? Like this is 3 here, this is 1. So I'd be giving myself 3 pawn islands. I only want to have I want to have as least or as little as possible. So knight takes would be the principal move. So far so good. Any questions?
Nope, I'm following.
Great.
This
Yeah.
is these are lines I never like get into. Like I aren't my games because everybody's playing like pretty much openings you've taught me and whatnot, like and defenses you've taught me. Like I just don't get into like this position on the board is just
Mm.
crazy to me.
Yeah,
His
you're.
position actually is really familiar to me. Your defense on black is not familiar to me at all.
Oh, but white structure is more familiar, right?
Yeah, that's much
Yeah.
more familiar to me. I resonate with that. I can understand his thought process. Your thought process, like the lines you're talking about, I don't really follow them a whole lot, but I think that's just a lack of I haven't played enough to understand that. But
Yeah, this structure is common, or yeah, white structure, black structure in the center is common in a Queen's Gambit declined or a French defense. I don't think we've talked about those openings. So,
it seems to me that he would want his queen to stay on the D file to look at that pawn. Because that pawn, like you were saying, that pawn has a lot of pressure with the queen there.
mm-hmm.
But without the queen there, that suddenly no longer really becomes a problem for you. Like,
Yeah,
does that make
it does make sense. He actually wanted to uh, keep the pressure there. Queen C2 is doing a couple things where he's making space for the rook to go to d1, where now the pressure is on d5 still, but also on my queen, right? So if trades happen, if I take on c4 or trades happen on d5 and the center starts opening up, there's going to be a rook looking at my queen, and that's not going to be fun. He's
okay?
also immediately threatening to take on d5, and I can't recapture this way because my bishop is hanging. So
Ah, okay,
those are the two ideas with queen c2. But I think already here I can play a move like d4 and then just take the center, right? Or take away these squares. e3 being pretty important because if he plays e3 now, well, I can just push d3. But c3 probably being the most important because the knight wants to develop to this square to get more control of these light squares, right? Because that worked really well with his bishop. But now the knight's going to have to go to a more inferior
okay.
square of d2, and his tactics are not going to work,
Oh,
right? He's
your
not going to.
mic cut out. You muted
Hello? Oh,
in
yeah.
Discord.
How about now?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, my alt key is my mute key, so yeah. Okay, so yeah, the c3 being the move he wants to be, or the square he wants to be putting his knight. And e3, if he plays e3, then he's just going to get a pad structure because I have all this control of e3, and that carried on over to the endgame, all this pressure or control of e3. That's where my tactics began to happen. So I think d4 is like the principal move, the best move for black here. Queen e7 is also good, keeping tension in the center. It gets out of the way of this rook coming to the d file, and I'm defending the bishop. And I'm preparing to put my rook on the d file. So I thought it was a useful move. Queen c7 is also good, but both my queen is undefended, and maybe I don't like that happening to my queen because now both these queens are looking at each other undefended. I just didn't like it. I went for the more solid Queen E7 where things aren't being undefended. Everything's being defended. Okay,
Okay.
and so he plays knight to D2, and already he's suffering problems, and Black is able to get a pawn advantage, or at least like he can get a positional advantage being equal to a pawn basically by playing the move d4. Then knight again wants to go to c3, but if he goes here now, I'll just play the move d4. Okay, and we get a very similar situation to what happened in our game, where I just have a pawn on d4. So he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to lose the tempo, so he brought the knight to d2. But this is hurting his development, right? We look at this bishop. The bishop can't really develop easily. The knight would have to move again, but where's this knight going to go? It can go to b3, which actually looks like a good square, um, and he should have played that. But for the time being, with this knight on d2, this bishop's having a hard time develop. He went for this idea of like playing here, but that didn't work out after a very good response that I played. So just developing my knight, I'm comparing my pieces as well. Okay, my knight is better than this one, but this knight is equal to that one. So I'm already getting a slight edge in terms of piece value, like activity, which one is more active. That's not what happened. And at any point, actually, White could take here on d5, and it would be good for him or fine for him. It would create a more equal position because the way that it stands, Black has more pawns in the center, which means uh, he should have an advantage, right? He has more pieces in the center, and you want to be trading these side pawns for these center pawns. So at some point he should have taken here, maybe play like knight to c4, and he's starting to activate, but he didn't. He just kept the tension. He played a move a3, and I have a move that counters it, so he's preparing b4, but I'll just play a5, and now you can't play b4 because on this recapture, you're going to be losing your rook, right? So
Yep.
his queen side is now becoming passive as well. So White's just getting cramped, and he plays this move b3, which I didn't like at all. But how are you going to develop this bishop, right? You're going to have to move this knight, but the knight goes to b3. a5 is also useful because the bishop now has a hidey hole. I can maintain this diagonal, right? Um, where I'm putting all that pressure in the center and on the king. And after knight b3, I just keep that pressure, go here, and then I am reserving this move a4 to attack that knight once it gets there. So again, my opponent just um, having a cramped position and uh, not able to make the most out of his pieces because of it. Okay, so b3 already being his first mistake, and bishop d7 being a miss. Um, I was wanting to bring my rooks to the center files D and C, where I have tactics against the queen, and then D, because that's kind of the crucial point in the position, is D5 and D4, and this pawn looks like it's going to advance, and I want my rook to be behind this pawn when it advances, or gets traded, either way, but really when it advances. What the best move is for black is the move that I played, the move after bishop d7, which is d4, where you would just get a transposition, essentially, just without the bishop being on d7. So there was an opportunity here for white to equalize. Um, let's turn on the computer and see what the computer thinks. Hopefully my voice doesn't cut out.
Nope, it's fine.
Great. I'm assuming it's e3 or takes on d5. Yeah, like all these moves look really good. Um, basically just to stop d4 from happening, right? Take out that pawn or push e3 and prevent d4 from happening. And the position is relatively equal, favorable for black because his pieces are a little bit better placed and he has better development. Uh, but what happened in the game was gave black a for sure advantage. So bishop e2, and now the move d4, and that pawn is heavily
Computer
defended.
likes that one.
Yeah, heavily defended by all these pieces. He can't push e3 now. Even if he does, I can just take. The bishop, when it was on c1, it helps defend e3, x-rayed through the knight. So e3 becoming an extremely weak square, I can start to create ideas on that square. Maybe it's like knight g4 or whatever. In general, I have more control of the center. I'm winning this game already very slightly. Okay, knight to e4, inviting trades, and e5 being really good. I thought here for a minute, there really is. Oh yeah, and this was also my thought beforehand. Like, okay, if I push d4, I'm going to be giving up squares. What squares am I giving up? I'm going to be giving up c5 and e4. So that means his knight can get to e4. What do I do then? Well, I'll just trade. His queen will come down, and then maybe I'll have a move like f5 attacking that queen, and I can cement my center with e5. So I felt like this was the correct move because I I calculated it. Trade, and then here I thought for a minute, okay, do I play f5 or do I play e5? And I liked e5 first because if he plays any other move and then I play f5 and he does this check here, it's actually a huge blunder because of bishop e6 and that queen is trapped. So not playing f5, reserving it for a moment where I have an opportunity to win the queen. Um, so instead of going for e5, this also doesn't give me any sort of weakness to my king, where if I played f5, there would be some weakness. And my pawn structure is a little weird too. It could still be a transposition to what happened in the game, but maybe it's a little bit better for white in some cases. So e5 being the best move with f5 to follow up. He plays queen to h4, and this is a common idea when your opponent has um, this pressure against you. You want to relieve that pressure by trading pieces, and you want to trade as many points off the material at once, which is the queens. However, I think the queen trade actually favors me because I'll have a lot of subsequent moves that will give me more control of the center as we see. So I thought a minute here about what I should do. Like, okay, do I play rook to e8? Do I let this queen trade happen on e7? I can't play g5 because I'll hang h6 and then maybe I'm getting mated, so can't do that. And then I just opted for trading, being the best move, thankfully. Playing g5, being an inaccuracy, but also the most forcing. Um, what could he do here instead? I was looking at bishop takes here. Maybe the computer likes it, I don't know. But bishop takes here, I take here, and he has knight f5, attacking h6. And I thought this was fine for me because I have the two bishops. Still have great control of the center, so I thought that was okay for me. Knight f3 being the best move, but still black having an insane edge because of all that control in the center. And yeah, it's
Pawn
now it's
chain
a
looks mean.
yeah, there's so much. Black has such a spatial advantage, control of the center, and White's position is very cramped. Like none of his pieces can really improve. He can't push b4. He can't push a4 because then I would just enter on b4. He can't brood his rooks on any good squares. His knight can't go to any good square. So in positions like this, what you want to do is improve all your pieces as much as you can because White can't do anything, right? Or your opponent can't do anything. As soon as I sacrifice my knight for nothing, no. As soon as I push a pawn here, then squares start to open up for my opponent for his pieces, where he can get counterplay. I want to improve my position as much as I can, my pieces. I want to improve my pieces as much as I can before I commit a pawn move, because right now these guys are looking great. Um,
What about like your pawn on like e4? That looks like it's potentially weak,
Weak. That's
right?
true. Yes. And so yeah, E4 and F5 are the weakest squares in my center, and he should play a move like G4, which will sacrifice a pawn and take the center. That is an idea that he should play. Maybe he should even play it right now, which is why after rook to d1, the computer wants me to play g4 so that he can't play g4 himself, and also f3 would be weaker as well. F3 right now is also a horrible blunder, right? Trying to chip away at that center because of a move like d3 with check, right? And now the king has to move, and then I take on e2, and then his rook has to move, and then I can play like bishop here or take here, and I'm just getting um, complete compensation for my center falling apart because I have a passed pawn and I'm trading pieces. Maybe I'm even winning a pawn at the end of it. The position is opening up to his king, all sorts of things. So yeah, and so that's why he didn't want to play. He didn't play f3 because of this e3 check, which is very annoying. Or even just sidestepping the pawn and playing something like e3. Although I probably don't want to be closing the position too much, as that helps out the person who is in pressure, which is something that he did later on too. Do you have any other questions? I have to respond to this text message really quick.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Um, yeah, I just gotta send a number really quick.
Take your time. I like this. Very, very educational.
What?
Just this game review, get understanding now what moves you're playing why. Like when I saw your pawn chain at first, I was like gnarly pawn chain, but then I was also like looks a little weak, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously looks like you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, and a little weak, but I have moves to reinforce it, like rook to e8, right? Get my and if he plays that g4 move, I can. If he takes on f5, like I don't even have to take on g4, but if he takes on f5, I can recapture with my bishop, which will defend e4. And with the rook here and this bishop on f5, like e4 is going to be defended nicely. Um,
How did your king end up on G7 or on
uh,
H7?
because I played it after here. I thought it was actually a pretty high level move, but I didn't like it. Bishop e6 was played to get control of d5, so that like if I ever do push this pawn, that I'm controlling the only square that my opponent has in the center, and also just getting out of the way of any sort of checks that could happen in the future. Let's say if this bishop goes to g2. Also, when he played rook to d1, he's x-raying through, targeting that hanging bishop, so defend that guy or at least get him out of the way. Knight going to b3 again. Where is that knight headed? Right there is no good square for that knight. So kind of a waste of a move. He should have played king h1, which he did later.
A lot
But
of his moves get orange check marks.
yeah, I mean, he just yeah he's under a lot of pressure here. He's played passive the whole game basically, and he's just not playing actively. Like he should play g4. He should play h4. Like these are moves that seek um, to trade off
Open up your king
pressure.
side.
Oh yeah, what? Yeah,
Open up your king side, it seems
yeah.
like
Open
if
up
he
my
did
king
that.
side. Like maybe this bishop can get activated. Like you can use this h file for a nasty check here. I mean, yeah, he just didn't play actively. What should white play in this position? I think it's king h1 or h4 or g4. Yeah, g4 being the best move because you're trying to chip away at e4, right? So if you play g4, then I probably have to respond with like rook to e8 to defend it. Then if it takes, then this is great, right? This side pawn is worth less than the center pawn.
Oh,
Can you still hear me?
now the computer is struggling.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Yep.
Okay. But yeah, that was probably the best move was playing g4, but he just didn't find good defense. He didn't want to. He's a player who doesn't like to give up his structure, right? He plays for comfortability. But sometimes ugly chess is necessary defense. You have to give yourself some sort of ugly structure in order to defend against all this pressure. Also, when you're defending, like it's no doubt that black is the one winning here, right? He has insane control of the center. When you are having to defend, when you realize your opponent has an advantage, you want to seek to change the position, make it complicated. Have your opponent constantly switching gears about okay, what squares just became weak, or this wasn't what I was expecting, etc. So playing moves like I don't know b4 or g4, they're seeking to disturb the synchronicity within my position. It still is like
So
good, but
right here, the computer when I was watching it on the transposed board on chess.com, the computer really wanted you to play b5 right here.
was it
Why?
here?
Or maybe it was a little further.
I think it was a little further. Um, I was thinking about a4 for sure, but not b5 here. I was thinking b6, but I'll show you. I know what you're talking about, and I did eventually play b5, right?
Yeah, we saw because I put in chat. I was like, he's literally a computer.
Yeah, king h7 being a miss, probably my worst move of the game. But the idea here is a little deep, where when my king's on h7 and his is on h1, there are an odd number of squares between each king, which gives me the opportunity to have opposition when all the pieces come off the board. So a very deep move, but not the right time to play it. And there's probably something more critical like playing b5. Maybe b5 here is, yeah, I think b5 here is the move. Because c4 is weak and it's not easy to defend it. No, actually, no, it's not b5. It's actually still g4 um, to not let g4 fall. But, well, there is a point. King e7 being a mistake, but still black is winning. So,
Oh yeah.
but bishop c1 now, this is a terrible move. Again, passive. Like, just, that bishop was fantastic on this diagonal, right? Like I move one
It seems
pawn
like
and
his
it's
moves, like you've told me before, like it seems like his moves are not giving his pieces anywhere good to go in the future. Like, where does the bishop go from there?
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, he's just been playing passive. I mean, honestly, I think it has a lot to do with psychologically, like me beating him in the past, and he just feels like he can't fight. Um, and that, he's thinking in this way, and that's why his pieces are doing this. But also maybe to his style, like when I watch him play other people, he usually shoots for like these closed positions, passive positions where he can try and hold a draw, try and lock things up. Like when I push D3 and he plays E3, like this is locking things up, and you have really good chances to draw when the position becomes closed like this, even though I do have a pass pawn. Okay, but 95 being the best move, and the reason for this is that it immediately um, like takes advantage of your opponent's last move, right? Like the bishop was fantastic on this square. Now it's not on this square and it's not controlling any of these squares. So I'm going to play 95 with no worry of some sort of tactic. Like if he played another move, let's say he plays h3, I play 95, he can have tactics with like playing e3 or by playing um maybe knight no, actually yeah, but, okay, yeah, he could have some tactics with e3, right? Where if I want to push it, or even if I trade, right, I'm still losing that piece. So 95 now not being the best, but when he moves the bishop off that diagonal, then 95 is like immune. Um, and he thought I was trying to go for g4, which makes sense. But really it was to push d3. I was running low on time here, and probably b5 is the best move. Um, because I'm threatening to win. I have like 3 attackers on c4. I was even thinking about playing just knight takes c4 and creating this position where I'll have 2 bishops or I'll have 2 pawns for the knight and more control of these important squares for my opponent. But I just didn't have the time to really calculate. And I'm sure b5, knight takes, I'm sure these are all winning moves for black. But I wanted to just start breaking open. I thought now was the time to push d3 because I didn't see a way for any of my other pieces to become better placed, right? Like my knight on e5 was my last improvement I thought about. Um, and then, yeah, I thought now was the time to push. d3 still being good, but I think, yeah, here b5 is the best. Yeah, pretty sure. Still with me, right?
Yep.
Yeah, a4 and b5 being the best and d3 being good. And actually, yeah, not terrible. Um, like let's look at. I like to compare the the numbers after each move. This will help you when you're evaluating your games with the computer. But let's say I play the best move here, b5, and let's look at the computer's responses. Okay, c takes b5, knight d2, and knight d2, and look how close all these numbers are to 2, right? To -2. We go back to my d3 move and look at the disparity of numbers here, right? Third best move is -2.6, which is higher than the other one. Do you understand what that is saying, what that means? Or do you have an idea what that means?
As in, have it like what is having more disparity between those numbers mean?
Yeah, like what is the difference in the position in terms of evaluation between playing d3 and b5? Like why does d3 give -2.6 and b5 give -2.2?
So while it looks like overall the B5 move it gives like with the best move or whatever gives a close, those numbers are closer. With your move that you played there, he has to play more carefully is what I would understand. Like it's easier for him to make a mistake.
After d3, it's easier for him to make a mistake. That's the
Right, like so
key.
like if like his third best line is
Hmm.
-2.7 versus the other one, his worst line or whatever was -2.2.
Yep.
So like it's like easier for him to make something that costs him, make a move
Yes.
that costs him.
But it
Okay.
also makes it easier for me to make a mistake that costs me, right? B5
Okay.
being overall the best move because it gives you advantage without the compromise, right? Without having to jeopardize your position, right? Really, if we want to get into um, practically speaking, like there's no longer weaknesses uh, here, right? When I push D3, I create weaknesses for my from on my in my position that white can take advantage of. Like now he can bring a knight to C3. Maybe then I can go to D5, right? He can lock
Okay.
things up with E3, right? I gave up these two squares and he took advantage of it. If I play D5, sorry, if I play B5, I'm not giving up any of this, right? So more
Okay.
solid. It's more solid. It keeps the advantage. But D3 definitely gets to the point. Like I'm creating a passed pawn. The position is becoming sharp. There's gonna be imbalances. This yeah doesn't do that, but still is the best and doesn't it doesn't create a more tactical or a sharper position. Okay, it's committing. Okay, so that's to the best of my ability how I can describe it, but I always look at that when I'm evaluating the computer, the disparity between the best moves. Humans make mistakes, so you want to be putting a human in a situation where his second or third best move could be a win for you, right? If you play solid chess every move, your opponent could find the best response and it could teeter off to a draw because you never took any risk. If that makes sense. So
Okay.
D3 really is taking a risk. It's committing um, and making the position sharper. But yeah, you can win here for sure. But B5 in the long run, you're going to win eventually. Okay, and then I play B5 because well, because it's the only piece that hasn't moved, right? Like improve my position as much as I can. The pawn is the only one that hasn't moved, and it's kind of a target, right? In the future, if he plays like F3 or F4 or something, and yeah, I want to be attacking here. This is my way to if I get my bishops over here. Then they start slicing and dicing on these squares. The D1 square being very important because that's my queening square, right? If this pawn keeps going, so I want to get my bishop to B3, right? And b5 is the way to do it. If he accepts this pawn, then I just go to b3, right? And then I saw, okay, I go here, if he goes rook d2, saving his rook, I have knight c4, and there's no square for that rook. I'm going to be winning the exchange, and then my positional advantage is going to be converted into a material advantage because I'm winning the exchange. Makes sense?
Okay.
Okay, so in this pawn, it's doubled. I can take care of it. Like maybe after bishop takes b3, I can activate my rook on b8 or c8. Rooks like open files, and this is another avenue, right, to getting into white's position. So yeah, looking for a way to break open. Okay,
So real quick, it
yeah.
looks like so like his and this may just be obvious, but like it seems to me that his knight and his bishop being on squares where they started, though we have talked about the best position being the board as it is, but once the game's already developed like this, you're already on the third
Mhm.
rank or whatever. Like it doesn't seem like having his knight and his bishop where they start are good for him.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. The bishop can be a great square. Like the back rank squares can be a great square for the bishop because they have all this room to activate. Honestly, like a bishop on these two squares is really good because they have these long diagonals. Like that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares on the back rank. Not bad. A knight, however, on the back rank can only go 3. So that's a pretty terrible one. And really, when I say that when the game starts, the way the board is set up is actually a very solid position. That's because the structure is is solid,
Yeah.
right? Is in a row, which makes
But
it
once it's not there, then it kind of seems like a weakness, right? Or
yeah. Then the back rank squares are not going to be a good setup for your pieces because your structure has changed. Um, but if anything, I would say the bishop on the back rank is would be the best. A rook would be good on the back rank as well. Like you can have your rooks connected. Um, it helps against back rank issues, like if another rook tries to get back there, which is a common problem. But a knight on the back rank is completely passive. I mean, just in general, any piece on the back rank is passive, but knight being the worst of all. Okay, so now the bishop comes back to b2 though, right? and waste of tempo, right? I mean, he went boom, boom. He did this like 3 times with his bishop. But now the knight or the bishop comes back to b2, attacking my knight on e5. And if I retreat that knight, say to c6, one, he can take with tempo, or knight g6. I mean, there's no good squares for that knight, right? I wanted this knight to go to d3, but he didn't trade on d3, he pushed. Um, and this is a tough decision for black because he has to he has to trade this good knight for this passive bishop, and he has to ruin his structure. Also, when I'm in time pressure, I'm not able to calculate all my options, right? Consider all my options. Um, I don't like bishop d6 either. If I were to try and be if I wanted to preserve the structure a little more, I would play the bold move, knight takes c4, pawn takes c4, and then maybe like uh, pawn takes or bishop takes. I think bishop takes being the best because you're setting yourself up for like d2 push and infiltrating there. But even here, like he can play knight c3 or knight d2, and it's not so certain that my sacrifice is going to pay off, right? Like he's blocking my pass pawn from promoting, and I don't have any other ways to really infiltrate on these light squares. So I went just for going to f3, where in general, if you have the bishop pair in an open endgame or any endgame, a really open endgame, then you have an advantage. Also, with this bishop gone, all the light squares around his king become weak, or really all the squares in his position, all the light squares in his position become weak. So probably the best move, but I don't know. We can check with the computer. I think it was the most practical move.
What
Um,
happens if he just doesn't take that knight? Because that knight's not immediately threatening anything. What happens if he just leaves that knight?
what do you mean?
Like you throw knight on f3,
Oh, if he
so
doesn't
like you're not
take,
immediately threatening anything.
it's true. It's
Could he
true.
just could he just let it sit there for a turn at least, and
He could.
or is it about the squares that you're taking away really, not more what you're threatening?
Yeah, like I'm protecting d2, which is a square I want to push my pawn. His king can no longer go anywhere. This rook can no longer go anywhere. So it's kind of like a have to. You have to take out this knight. I mean,
Okay.
this is my strongest piece on the board too. And look at this bishop. This bishop hasn't done anything all game. It makes sense that you want to be trading this bad bishop for this really awesome knight. Like this knight is worth as much as a rook when it's on the 6th rank and when it's right next to his king. There could be some sacrifice ideas here as well, or I could even cement it further by playing something like g4. It's just a very dangerous piece to just leave there. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, maybe he should have to play something like knight to d2, where he can trade his knight for knight, keeping the two bishops, because these guys are awesome when there's lots of room for them. Maybe that was the better approach, better defense. But it's definitely still a tough position, and computer evaluates bishop takes f3 as his only
Best, right?
option. Yeah, I mean, you play knight d2. Um, I probably would just take the knight, and then probably play f4. And yeah, the position is still going to be, well, no, I can't play f4, but this still looks like a decent uh, way to defend. I mean, okay, black is still winning, negative 2.6, but again, that third move, if black doesn't play accurately, it can start to teeter off into a draw. So maybe knight, trading off the knight for knight was the better approach in practical sense. Okay. But he decides to trade. I take here, and my structure is ruined, but I have the two bishops, and I have many moves that can strive to open up the position. Um, but yeah, it wasn't a event that I loved because I had this great center. But when you have this really good position, you aren't just going to win by having a good position. You have to get into tactics, and things have to get ugly in order to find the winning tactic. And that's it for all cases of chess when you have good position. So I felt it was necessary. And then after knight d2, he's defending c4. Currently, like I'm just threatening to take, right, and win a pawn, so he has to defend it. The knight is also coming back into the game off the back rank, getting better. And the knight is doing a lot. It's threatening to take on f3 and defending here. I decided to take once on c4. Otherwise, he would, take here, and I don't think I have decent enough counterplay for it. I'm also opening up a file for a rook as well. That could be good for me. But I play the best move, which is f4, which is uh, still taking advantage of like the weaknesses on the king side. And you saw in the game, like I played a sacrifice move. It was almost like a bait, right? Like I played bishop takes e3, and I thought for a minute here, I thought about a lot of different things. I thought about taking here, but I just didn't like I even thought about f takes e3, but I didn't like here and then here, right? Like both bishops are hanging and then it comes with a fork. And I just didn't know if I got enough out of it after playing like e2, right? Maybe he can just afford to give up one of the rooks and play this, right? And I'm still getting forked. So this is what I
Okay.
saw in my head, which is why I didn't play f takes e3, both bishops being undefended and me just not getting enough compensation at the end of the day because of this fork. But there's probably something better for white or for black. For example, after here and here, there's bishop takes h3, which defends the bishop, defends e6, threatens here, and still threatens to push both these guys. But just in general, okay, so like that's why I play bishop takes because the bishop's not hanging on c5, and if he recaptures, I still get this formation, which is just dominating for white or for black because two passed pawns on the sixth rank is equal to as much as a rook, but three passed pawns all together on the sixth rank is just too much. I mean, this is probably worth at least a queen. And I'm just going to push and promote like at least two of these. So, which is why he didn't take on e3. Um, but yeah, the best move in this position is bishop takes h3, and I didn't see the idea here where you take on e1 on f1. He goes here, and you go bishop e2, and then it's just going to be. Oh, actually, yeah. I mean, this is still going to be the best move, but I didn't see all this. I didn't have enough time to calculate all that. I just went with the cleanest approach, which was save your bishop and invite um, tactics and complications. Are there any questions? Because I know you were talking about this endgame. I mean, this is a very interesting position
No,
here.
this part to me made a bit of sense of what you were doing. I did see too that you were under time pressure because he was up by like 20 minutes on you at one point or something, but or 15 minutes. Um, but yeah, no, this part made sense. It's really when we get to the end and you guys are kind of dancing with the rooks. That's where I was like, what is going on here? So, but
Well, I do kind of fumble a little bit. So bishop takes e3 being bad or being good, g4 being a good move as well, trying to lock things up, right? I no longer have bishop takes h3. There was this idea I was looking for where I take on h3 and go g2 check and maybe like bring a rook over and checkmate here, but it just doesn't exist because this file isn't open enough. But I still go for that idea a little bit later on. But I play bishop d2, which is a miss. I mean, honestly, the bishop is immune, right? It cannot lose. It cannot be taken for the same reasons as before. Again, with the time pressure, I just didn't want to risk it. And instead, I should play like bishop takes c4 or even push to d2, and then play bishop takes c4. And yeah, I'm just putting more and more pressure. And yeah, I need to get this d2 move in, and this was the time to do it. But I decided, okay, I'm up a pawn. I have a great position. Why don't I just trade pieces, right? I want to simplify, and that's usually a good strategy in a lot of cases when you are up a pawn, you have a good position, you want to just trade pieces. So I simplified the position. Now I have to worry about less in the time pressure, right? It still is like it gave White some fighting chances for a draw. Um, but then after knight takes f3, this I felt like h5 was a bait for this. Then the tactics all start to flow, and it gets into a very puzzle-like position where black has to sacrifice a rook or sacrifice the exchange to win by playing d2. Well, d2 comes in, and yeah, you can't take here because I get um, I get promotion with check. But there was knight takes g5 with check, and then takes here, and then you're forking and winning a piece, but it just doesn't work out because I promote to a queen, and you can't let that queen live there. You can't take either of these guys, right? So you have to take, and then I just get a check, and all the material comes off the board, and I'm just in a winning endgame with uh, a rook versus a knight. But even here, I still think white has his chances because he's got more pawns. But yeah, I think knight takes g5 was the best try here. But said he plays rook d1, and the rook went to c1 to defend c4. Now c4 is undefended, and I have to play this move. There's really like not much else I can do because of that same knight takes g5. You know, it looks like I'm going to be losing a couple pawns here. I always think about like rook d3, but in these situations where you have so much pressure, you have this pass d pawn. Um, you know, your good position tactics are going to have to start flowing, and you're going to have to give something up. You're going to have to sacrifice in exchange for like a winning tactic. And so that's what this move is, where you're going to take my rook, I'm going to take your rook, and I'll still have a pass pawn, right? So good for me. Except I don't take his rook automatically,
He,
and I play
yeah,
rook
you
takes
took
knight.
his knight.
Took his knight. And the reason for this is that if I take his rook, he doesn't have to recapture here. He can play rook takes on d2, and there goes my passed pawn. Still is like a good position for me where I have the bishop versus the knight, but I want to simplify more. I don't want to keep more pieces on the board. I want to get rid of them. And I also lose my passed d pawn, which was like that passed d pawn on d2 was worth as much as an exchange or a piece, right? That's why I'm able to play this move because that pawn is worth so much. And I keep the tactics, right? Like the threat of the bishop taking the rook is on the board, and the threat is always greater than the execution. If I take that bishop before I save my rook, then I'm executing, and I'm no longer threatening. So, um, yeah, rook takes being the best move. Let's see what the computer evaluates after bishop takes, because I want to say it's close to a draw or closer to a draw. I think black still has his chances. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, black still has his chances, but after rook takes d2, um,
It doesn't like, yeah, it does not like bishop
yeah,
takes.
rook takes was the most accurate. And yeah, here see the disparity, right? We have it gets down to negative zero point 0.8. It goes, you know, it's still winning for black, but um, a little more complicated than it needs to be. Also, I don't like that both of his pieces are on dark squares. Actually, like all of his pieces are on dark squares, and I have a light square bishop, so it makes it difficult for me to target anything. And also my rook's hanging on d8, and I have to watch out for checks, and yeah, not fun. So yeah, playing rook takes, and I was kind of proud of myself for this because I did it in such a small time frame, and it takes courage to play a move like this. Um, and then yeah, my what really led me to playing this move is that I see that his rook has like no squares to go to, and it has to move. And then I play bishop e2, and then I'm on the queening square, and then I'm winning the exchange at the very least, right? If I promote, um, and if he doesn't take on d2, then I'm just winning back the exchange, and I'm just with a pass pawn in a rook equal rook in game, I got to be winning. All these moves are being played; they're all played, and then rook d3 being a very um, dominating move because I'm making that rook better, is still defending d2, and I'm also restricting this king from ever coming out, right? When the in the end game, the king needs to become active and become a piece because everything else is gone. And rook d3 stops that. It also is targeting two weak pawns. I'm able to take with check and then come back to defend, which is annoying. So my opponent doesn't want that. He plays king g2. Okay, and rook endgames are fascinating. You never know if you're going to get a draw or if you're going to win or if you're going to lose in every rook endgame. Why do I think I'm going to win here? I don't really, but I thought that if I compare what I have versus what he has, then I should win. And really, it comes down to this A pawn. This A pawn can become a passer. He needs to get rid of this D pawn by bringing his king all the way over. By that time, I could probably win these two pawns with my king, win this A pawn as well, and then I'll have what, three extra pawns versus his one, and then I should be winning there. So It's just a matter of waiting, uh, waiting it out and then winning. Do you have any questions about this in game?
That explains why you took that pawn on a3. I was so confused why you
Gave
gave
up.
up that good pawn
hmm
for that pawn on a3. I was like, what's going on here?
If you think
But
about it,
that makes
I
sense now.
I gave up this d pawn for these three pawns and created another passer, right?
Yeah.
So that's a part of the end game that we haven't talked about at all is that you get this advantage, especially a passed pawn, and you're looking if you can't promote it, you're looking for other ways to create an advantage, and it usually involves trading off that pawn for maybe two passed pawns, or like here, I'm giving up that pawn for three pawns, and then creating another passer. Um, but yeah, this pawns also they have more value the further they are up the board. So this D pawn is one step away from graduating, right, becoming a hot model. And this A pawn, if once I create a passer for it, it's got a couple steps to make before it gets there, right? So definitely the D pawn is worth more than my A pawn, but um, I can't move this guy anymore, and this king's coming over. By that time, though, yeah, I will be winning all these other guys. Um, and then yeah, king h6, f3 takes h5, coming in, and he stops
Ooh,
it.
your analysis is ruining the computer there.
Oh, yep.
Can't
So
hear
I'll
you.
turn that off. Okay. So we'll just go back. And I thought about playing like f3 here, but that just creates a weakness. Like he can infiltrate now on f4 and then attack here. And I want to restrict his king as much as I can. Bring him over here. And we come to this situation where it seems like I can't make any more progress, right? Like I go back, he goes here, I come forward, and we're just repeating. But I have this move, a4, and this puts white in zhugzwang, right? I think we've talked about that before, right?
Has to make a move he doesn't want to make.
Yeah. He either has to undefend, he has to undefend one of these two pawns, right? Say if he goes a2, I take here, he takes here, I take with check, he goes here, I take here, right? And I'm still getting those three pawns, like, and he's got nothing, right? It's going to be winning position. Even if I didn't have these two guys, or even if I didn't have my rook, I can probably still win or draw this position. It's that winning for black. But yeah, he has to make a decision. He has to come off the defense of one of these guys. He decides to go to f2, and there's an interesting point here where white might be able to checkmate uh, black. For example, if I play king h3, I lose on the spot after rook to h1, checkmate. So have
Ooh.
to be careful. King, when we got to this position, I was very aware that my king is running out of squares, and I have to be on the lookout for some sort of rook move to the back, right, or even rook here. So still very sharp, and I have chances to go wrong, which is why taking a3 is the most accurate. And I saw that if I take on a3, the rook comes off the back rank. It's actually kind of blocked by its own king, so it can no longer like come over here, and taking on h3 becomes very safe. And now when the rook leaves to go deliver that checkmate, I have the very nice rook a2 check, and now that king gets more squares, and uh, it becomes a loss for white. I mean, there's no other square. The king has to go to the back rank here. There's nothing, and then there's no more threats for black, and he's just going to be up 2-3 pawns, and yeah, it's just GG. So that's why he resigned after rook a2 check, because his last way of winning is shattered. But yeah, that was the game. Um,
Heck yeah. Okay, so that's why he resigned right there. I get it because he's gonna have to step back, and now you're playing the game where he's trapped. You got a rook on the seventh. It's over.
yeah, it's just dominating. I got three passed pawns. It's over. Um, yeah, a little unfortunate for him because I played him three times and won against him every time, and in different ways, right? Like I won in the opening one time. The second time he had an advantage and he blundered it, and then this third time he just got pushed off the board with my better positioning. So
Was that 3 times today that was on stream?
no, just three times in the 2 times in the past, and the third time was today.
Okay. Were those games ranked? Those games weren't ranked, were they?
They were all ranked.
Against him? Oh, they were all ranked
They're
against
all
him.
ranked.
And he
And
is he the 1639 or are you the 1639?
I am now the 1639. He was a 16 like 50, and I took a lot of points away from him. Um,
Oof.
I used when I came here when I got to Vermont, I was like 1550. So, um, yeah,
You're on the up and up.
I'm on the up and up. I'm hoping for at least 1800, before I start to like equalize. I mean, my goal is 2000. If I get to 2000, I'm a candidate master, guaranteed. I'm certified, and that would be great to have that title. And
Oh
then
yeah.
2200 would be national master. Okay,
Do
so
they do you get to pick who you want to play?
no, it's random. It's random pairings based on who won the previous round and then what your ratings are.
So you know Watson is trying to pass the judges a cool 100 to not have to play you again. He's like, please,
Um,
please.
he actually is the one organizing the
Oh, really?
pairings, and he chose to play against me again. He's so maybe he's on tilt. I don't know.
He's trying to get his elo back.
Yeah, and yeah. Um, and he even gave himself the white pieces. I was like, okay, I'll play black against you 3 times in a row, whatever. So, um, but I thought I played a great game. I thought it was a great game just in general. Um, Lots of cool positions, especially this end game was really cool.
I showed up right as your queens came off the board, and then like I went to go play. I think I played some of my own games, and then I came back, or I was still watching, but like passively, and then I came back and was like really paying attention, and I saw like all your pieces on the third, and I was like, dude, or on the yeah, I was like, dude is
Yeah,
not having a good time playing Bam.
yeah. I mean the spatial advantage here is crazy.
I feel like he should have kind of thought about moves more too, like with how much time he had spare. Like that's your time. Like
Hmm.
don't just throw it in the trash. Like take time and think about these moves. But like you were talking about his bishop going back and forth on B2 and C1 like 3 times. Like
Yeah. I mean, here when I played knight f3, he played bishop takes knight immediately. He didn't even think about
yeah,
it. But like as I
no, I
said,
saw
playing like knight d2 could give you a better position.
it looked like blitz. Like it was just like he was as soon as you did that, he took, you took. I was like, oh goodness.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I recapture. There's nothing else I can do here. So, but
Why does it? What is a question mark exclamation point?
it means
That
dubious, like inaccurate
dubious.
or dubiously. Yeah, dubious.
So
For
it see it doesn't like that move with the bishop
yeah.
takes.
Well, the computer's weird. Like when you analyze it, it says it's like when it just skims analyzes, it says it's brilliant or bad, or then it'll change its mind. So, just depends on how long it stays here. Like I think it's gonna say this is the best move. If we go back one position.
Yeah, I think it did say because we were looking at if that knight D2 move was better, but yeah, C is
Yeah,
bishop or
it
no
says it's like bishop c3, but
second best line.
still, yeah. Um, like when I played here, when I was going through the games and I played this move, it said it was brilliant, and now it says it's just good, you know. So, yeah, I would say it's just good because well, white doesn't have to recapture, right? So I agree. All right, I'm gonna end this.